started stream. Okay, start streaming. Okay, streaming. Stream now. Come on, I want to see the thing, people here. I want to see it. Okay, it's unmuted. We're ready. Okay, here we are. Okay, then I can totally see now. Stop using it. Okay, all right. Hello, everyone out there. Good evening, YouTubers. Welcome to this edition of Matinee Madness. I'm your host, David G, and we're going to do tonight my spoilery review of the new Star Wars film, The Last Jedi. And as I said, there's going to be a lot of spoilers here. So please prepare yourselves. If you haven't seen the film, you may not want to watch this into this review, because I'm going to get deeply into what happened in the plot and the story. So give me just one moment here to get my notes up. Okay, thing says I am live now. So here we go. Let me just 1 minute to get my notes up, and we will begin. Okay. Okay, and I'm going to turn off my other monitor so it doesn't distract me, or hopefully it won't cause an echo. Got my notes up here. Give me just one moment. Okay, my other monitor is off, and welcome to my review of Star Wars: The Very Last Jedi. And the number one thing that I'm going to say from the very beginning, just to start, is that this film far exceeded any expectation that I had. I've been waiting for it a while, of course, since Force Awakens, and I pretty much thought that I would like it, and I thought that it would be well done. But you know, there is a new director in this film, Rian Johnson. But I'm just going to tell you right here and now, this film completely blew me away. The man, he exceeded all of my expectations and everything. I mean, with the story, with the surprising plot twist, with the cinematography and his direction, and he created some truly classic moments. And there was times when I was watching this movie and I was just completely blown away. I was not at all prepared. I was going, wow, wow, oh my god. And to give you just a quick brief overview of my history with Star Wars, I was around for the very they're not actually the first films, but the first trilogy, the first three films that came out in 1977. I was there for them, and I've seen them all. And I was a little kid then, and I took back then I was into making cardboard figures and models and that kind of thing. And I got some old boxes, and I made me about a probably was at least a 3 to 4 foot replica of R2D2, and I pulled it along with string. I made me a C3PO, which was probably close to at least somewhere close to almost about 5 foot tall. So I was really into the genre, really into the lore and the story. So I have a long background with this fandom, but I wouldn't call myself a nerd in this fandom. I could care less about if it closely follows canon. I could care less about that kind of thing, and I don't worship the things like it's some sort of a sacred religion. I have my own sacred religion, so I don't need Star Wars and the Force and all the esoteric Middle Eastern stuff in order to enjoy the film. So I'm not that deep in it, but I do have an emotional connection to the characters and nostalgic connection as well to the lore and the story. But I would say, going to my general overview of this movie, everything that I review, the main elements that I review on a movie on to see if I believe it was successful, it just exceeded my expectations. The pacing of the script was excellent, outstanding. There was not a single moment that I was bored. Right from the very first frame with um, Poe um, playing pretty much chicken with General Hawks, and the little comic relief when he started to describe him and how he distracted him. I thought that all of that right on hit the money. It was hilarious, and it was just like the Poe character to do something, you know, really out there and really daring to help the resistance. That was excellent from the beginning. And then of course when Finn woke up and he says, "Where's Rey?" And then they jump right to where Rey is. And I expected, you know, a lot of exposition, cinematic exposition and set up before we actually got in to the story, what was going to go down between Rey and Luke. But they wasted no time. They got right into what was going on. And one thing I love about the direction and the scripting and the pacing of this film, the scenes were cut so tight. There was the dialogue. Everything was cut tight. It went from scene to scene to scene to scene to scene, and each scene had just enough dialogue and just enough exposition to set it up and to move, and just enough story and plot movement to move the story forward. And I think because that's one of my main pet peeves, and one of the things I really look for when I'm reviewing a film, especially a sci-fi action film. If you're sitting in a sci-fi action fantasy film and you are bored, there is a problem. Same thing with the comic book action films. That's the number one reason why I despise Batman versus Superman. There were so many times during that film where it just lagged and lagged. I almost fell asleep. And I went with two friends of mine that are the most absolute largest comic book nerds in the world, and they were getting bored. And they're like, "Oh my God, you know, when's something gonna happen?" No, this film, The Last Jedi, it just boom, 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 from action to action, from dialogue to dialogue, and every scene was just cut so very well, and all the editing. I'm really person into film. I never went to film school, but I've always um, admired the direction of every type of genre of film. And I admire all of his camera editing choices. The camera angles were excellent, and again, the way the scenes were cut and written, everything was such a tight production that, you know what, no, even the youngest kid, I don't think, could have been bored and want to fall asleep during this movie. It had so much action, it had so much plot, and beyond that, it had so many beautiful cinematic moments that were just classic and incredible. And there was so much plot, as I said, and there were so many moments that you just did not see coming. There's no way that I would have thought that they would have killed off Snoke this early, you know? I mean, and by the time, you know, he got Rey and Kylo together, I think anybody by the time right before, you know, when it looked like Snoke basically sent the lightsaber to Kylo, and he was basically commanding Kylo to kill Rey, I think by then anybody could have guessed that Kylo was not going to do it, that he was going to save Rey somehow. But I nowhere I thought that he would have been allowed to, you know, to slice Snoke in half and kill Snoke right in this episode. I thought Snoke was going to be a main villain and character, and at least by, you know, the next episode that we would find out more about him and his origins and all that. And that's probably one thing that if I were writing the series, I would have done differently, but I don't really grade it down for that, because the bottom line is this is still the way I would have eventually took the story, or him betraying Snoke and basically pulling a mutiny on Snoke and taking over the First Order himself. That's exactly because this whole series and this whole, you know, trilogy is basically the main focuses are Rey as the chosen one of the Force, and Kylo as, again, the chosen one of the dark side, who has turned away from the good and the light and still, you know, struggles with his decision. So that is basically what the next generation of what this film, you know, should be about. And there was another huge surprise for me. One of the most hugest surprises that blew me away that I absolutely loved was the fact that when Luke Skywalker confronts Kylo Ren outside of the cave, where, you know, the last vestiges about, you know, the 8 members of the Resistance are hiding out, and he pulls out his lightsaber, and they have the big fight and everything, and he actually takes Kylo takes his lightsaber and he does the same thing that he did with Han, trying to kill him the way he killed his father, stabbing him directly with the lightsaber, and the light goes through him. And I'm just sitting there going, what? Man, his power is incredible, because when he had walked out and all of the big trooper ships were pointing their guns at him, and then they all shoot him directly, and I could just I said, no, he's not going to be dead. The power that's in the force of him is going to be so strong that he's going to be able to survive all of those, huge blasters. And of course, after all they shot all the blasters at him, all the smoke clears, and he's still standing there, and he brushes his shoulders off. That was the coolest thing. I thought that was just so wonderful. And we are when all this is going on, we're led to believe that it's his strong power in the force that is enabling him to do that. But we find out later that he's actually astral projected an image of himself, light years to where Kylo and the Resistance are, but he is actually still on a mountain at that planet where he's been hiding out. It's called Astro something. I can't remember what it is, but he's still hiding on that planet. And when you see him there, and he's in his meditation pose, it's like the most shocking thing ever, and you're like, oh my god, this is like the coolest thing ever. I mean, I don't care, and I don't consider myself, I'm definitely not a sci-fi geek, but at that point I was just so geeking out. It was such a wonderful twist in the story, and it was just so awesome. It was just an incredible, and it's something that I never thought of, and that's something that I've watched a few videos where people that are really into the Star Wars lore, they've broken it down, that power of the Force has never been exhibited, in any of the other movies up until now. None of the Masters had. Obi-Wan didn't have it. If it did have it, they never used it. Yoda never used it. I don't think anyone has ever actually used it, such a thing, until now. And it was awesome to see, and that led to actually one of the most beautiful, classic, poignant cinematic moments I've ever seen in any film, in any genre. I don't care if it's sci-fi, I don't care if it's Star Wars, I don't care if it's drama or whatever. And that is when finally Luke gets the better of Kylo. He's like, oh my god, I guess I must have lost, We see Luke up, sitting in position on the mountain, and now you see that all his energy is drained, and he's grabbing his stomach. And I guess it was almost as though they were trying to say that when Kylo stuck his image with that sword, with that lightsaber, that it's kind of like that lightsaber in kind of a mystical, ethereal, spiritual sense, still went through his force, his soul, his spirit, and it's like that drained all the life force out of him, and that's all he had to give. And then as the two moons on the planet, the two suns on the planet, one sun is rising and the other sun is setting. At that moment, he falls back, he's depleted of all his life's energy, and he just vanishes, and there's nothing left but his robe floating in the wind. And he's gone now, and he's transitioned in the force. He's quote unquote dead. And just the way that scene was shot, with the one sun going up and the one sun going down, and then there's a cloud like in between them, and the score at that moment reaching the height of its pitch. That was one of the most beautiful, classic cinematic moments I have ever seen, and I have seen more movies than I can count for decades, starting when I was about like 12 years old up until now, and it just was it was one of the most beautiful cinematic moments I have ever seen. And to me, you don't have to be a fan of the character of Luke Skywalker. You don't have to be a fan of, the Star Wars lore and Star Wars legend and story. You don't even have to be a fan of science fiction. Just as long as you could understand what was going on in that scene, if you could not relate emotionally to the power of that scene, I say you're dead on the inside. And that is one area where Rian Johnson, if this is what that man as a director has inside of him, he is one of the most gifted directors of our time. And that's to me saying it's a lot. I've seen movies beautifully stylistic movies with people like Martin Scorsese and all of Steven Spielberg and Brian De Palma, Francis Ford Coppola. The names that if you mention in any kind of Hollywood circle, everybody's almost down on their knees worshiping, or we're not worthy. We'd give anything to be in these people's movies. And I'm sorry, but that one moment, that's a classic cinematic moment. And if you ask me, if there was nothing else he did even remotely right in this movie, he should still get not only an Academy Award nomination for Best Director, and for that, he should win an Oscar for that. Just in it. That scene right there was an incredible and absolutely incredible cinematic achievement. And I think that's the kind of moment that directors they long that they could create that kind of magic, and all of the elements came together. And there were quite a few moments like that in this movie. The moment where Leia is, blown out of the Jedi ship, and it seems all is lost, and it seems that she is dead, that you see that she is alive, and she uses the force with her finger to fly back through all the space debris to touch the window of what's left of the ship, and they bring her into the ship, and put her in the hospital medical area. That that again, the way that she flew through the stars, and the score at the time, and just to know that we all know that Carrie Fisher in real life has passed on, she is no longer with us, that brought so much weight to that scene. That was another beautiful, classically, perfectly filmed scenes that was just a masterpiece of cinema. That when Laura Dern's character sacrifice was the last person left on the Jedi ship, and she basically rammed the Jedi ship into the uh, the um, the First Order ship. The way they cut all the sound off, and you just saw all of the debris in the ship going through, and it basically tore a big hole that nearly split the other ship in half, and that gave Finn the ability to Finn and the new Asian character girl, that gave them the ability to escape from Phasma and everything. But just the way that was shot with all the audio off and just the debris flying at you, and you saw the big sacrifice that she made. That was an excellent moment right there. Just and these were three big moments that just had such emotional and cinematic effect, that they just were outstandingly classic, wonderful, just life-changing cinema moments. They were. And I think one of the main things about this movie, that where it rises so much far above the level of just a geeky science fiction film, is that the real raw emotions in the battle between the light and the dark come so alive in this film, primarily through Adam Driver and through Daisy Ridley. Adam Driver, from the moment that he has taken this part, the angst of the character, the conflict of the light and the dark between him, he nails that so emotionally. It's just incredible. I mean, he's playing a character that could come off like an extreme caricature, of any comic book or sci-fi, or like, William Shatner's as Captain Kirk, Khan, this thing. But no, with his performances and both directors that he has worked with, the real palpable confusion and emotion that comes out of his performances, it's just incredible. And it rises the film so far above just, a child science fiction geeky kind of fantasy. It actually makes it real. And I relate to it so much because I'm in a position now where I could also fall back to some very bad darkness or walk into the light. But I could betray either side. And sometimes you feel both sides are like, have each side has my arm, and it's like they're pulling in both directions. And I feel like I'm being pulled apart. And all of Adam Driver's, facial expressions, his voice inflections, everything about his performances, just it just really portrays that well. And the way that Daisy Ridley, as the person who's trying to understand her place, on the light side of the Force, she plays off him so excellently, and this movie is going directly right in the perfect direction with those two that I wanted to do. They even hint at a little sexual tension between them, and and of course she has the desire to want to turn him back to the light side of the force. She through her force kind of psychic kinetic abilities, she can always feel, you know, the conflict going on inside of him, and she believes that she can turn him back to the light, and they're really playing on that element in this film, and just the main story going on between them is perfectly the way I think the story should go. And you know, I'm so glad they didn't go to the fact that, you know, in this movie you find out that she's not a Skywalker, her parents were no one special and great in the Force, and that may be disappointing, but that opens up a whole new chapter that basically tells you that anyone now can be tap into the force and be strong into the force. And they explain in this film what actually the force is a lot better than any of the films before. Because I think you probably, if you would still ask the biggest Star Wars geek in the world who's seen all the films, and if you still ask them what the force is, they'll still be kind of like, I don't know really how to describe it. In this movie, you really get a sense of what the force is. And you get a sense that the force is both the light and the dark. It's not just the good versus the bad, it's the light and the dark. And you get a really sense of the need for balance between the two in this film. And that is primarily on the shoulders of the performances of Daisy Ridley and Adam Driver, and they do excellently in portraying that with their performances. And it's just incredible. And of course, Oscar Isaac as Poe, he was again always, you know, the maverick, always with the final hour, last ditch effort plans to save the day, and always kind of, you know, jumping the gun. And he, of course, he played his part really well. Same thing with John Boyega as Finn. So, and again, and Carrie Fisher's performances, they are all now very understated but stately, and I believe the characters now written very much, it very much respects her status as an actress, you know, in the entertainment industry, and it basically, I believe it does very well to respect her position as, you know, one of the original characters, an icon of this genre. And of course, another spoiler, I think there were a couple times where you think that, of course, now she's gonna die because, you know, she really died in real life. But from what I understand, she was alive to the ending of this movie, so her character does survive to the end of this movie. I don't know how they're going to resolve, you know, her absence in the next film, but you know, I think it was still good to see her in this strong role. And again, the role seems now so much more stately and so much more fitting for her age and for her position, as both the character and an actress in the industry. So I have no problem with her portrayal. If there's pretty much anything that I would have a problem with in this movie, it was basically, as I believe the two new characters. I'm sorry, I cannot remember the Asian young lady's name, her name or the character's name, but she was excellent. She was, oh my god, from her first scenes after her sister died, sacrificing her life, trying to drop the bombs on the enemy. And all of her chemistry with Finn and everyone else, she nailed all of her scenes. She really gripped me emotionally, and I was always rooting for her character. She was feisty and strong-willed, and I really liked her. Laura Dern's character was fitting who Laura Dern is. Wasn't really that big, but her sacrifice at the end was good, and her conflict with Poe was kind of interesting. It would have been nice to see her survive. See, might there have been any sexual chemistry between her and Oscar Isaac, but the way her character met her end was fitting and heroic. But I do have a problem with Benicio del Toro's character and his portrayal of the character with the stuttering and everything. No, for me, he didn't work. the character, it kind of worked, and it was a decent plot device to move the story forward. So I don't really have any qualms or criticisms of that. But Benicio del Toro's, his performance, I could have did without him. To me, he was the weakest link in this film, and pretty much he's the only thing that I will complain about in this film. I know a lot of the Star Wars geeks, they're giving it a 65 on Rotten Tomatoes, but the critics give it a 95. I'm sorry, I'm a critic. I give it the 95, and I am great, and I'm a great, fan of this genre. These people that are complaining, they're complaining about some of the smallest, stupidest thing, and these people, they worship the lore so much that if a character is not delineate specifically like they think it should be from the lore and the books and the way everything's done before, or if a story doesn't go the way they think it should go, then they pan the whole movie. They are bitter geeks with no taste. I'm sorry. To me, as a critic, if a movie like this really reaches its pinnacle when it would be still thoroughly enjoyed by someone who was not a fan of the genre in particular, and I'm not a fan of the genre generally, and not a fan of the actual story itself, the Star Wars story in this case, in particular. And this movie, to me, it was like The Dark Knight. This movie so rose far above just some kind of cheesy, childish science fiction Hollywood fair. It rose so far above that, just like the Dark Knight rose so far above just a Batman comic book movie, come to life. It had so many important, intelligent themes, and it rose above that level to where you didn't necessarily have to be a geek in that fandom to actually enjoy it as a good film on its own. And I would say the same thing about The Last Jedi movie. This is actually one of the best movies of all time that I've seen, because I've never, when I leave a theater where I've been shocked by the story, thoroughly entertained, emotionally touched, and I feel like I've been spent, then to me that's a good movie, because that does not happen to me often. But this was one of the few movies when I left the theater I was physically tired. I was just worn out, and I need to go back to see. They said, well, supposedly it was 2.5 hours long, but I'm going to go back and check that. There is no way this movie felt anywhere near like 2.5 hours long. I saw all three of the Lord of the Rings films. I've seen some, Titanic. I've seen some of the longest made movies, period. The only one that I can't really sit through is The Godfather. I've downloaded that and tried to, and over the first 20 minutes, I'm just like, I can't stand it. But this movie, the way the scenes were so cut, and the action and the emotional impact and the cinematic moments, I was still wanting more. I'm sorry, it just zipped right on by. There is no way I felt like I was in the theater any longer than perhaps maybe 2 hours. That's it. It zipped right on by like a 90-minute movie, really, actually. There's no way that this movie feels like it was 2.5 hours. So anybody telling you about the pacing, I say that they are full of complete, BS. So I give this movie an A plus. I give it, 95, 100. Awesome film, no matter where you stand on the science fiction genre. Awesome film. Ryan Johnson, incredible director. I don't know, his experience or whatever, but he nailed it beyond belief. So thank you so much for watching my spoiler review of Star Wars The Last Jedi. Please share this out on all your social medias, your Facebook, your Google Plus, your Twitter, and your Instagram. And if you like this review, please give the video a thumbs up, like, and subscribe. Once again, this has been David G, also known as Archbishop Gen X on Twitter. And thank you so much for watching, and have a good evening.